I begin with a story, as I often do. This from a beautiful book called There Is No Home for Us. Maurice and Natalia had grown up in Washington, D.C. They fell in love as teenagers, and they married early on in their teens. They found a little apartment moving out of their parents' house in Southeast, and they had begun their life together. They both had jobs that paid more than minimum wage, but not something we would call a living wage. And soon the landlady decided that she needed to sell the building because, as is so happening in all parts of metropolitan areas, in Philadelphia and Washington, D.C., neighborhoods are being bought up. Houses that have been holding tenants for a long time are being torn down. And this was the case here. Their house was going to be demolished to build a new-end, high-end rental in the growing gentrification of Southeast Washington, D.C. They didn't have much to do. They kept looking for other jobs and other places. They knew the eviction was coming soon, their termination was soon, and they decided that they would go down to Atlanta, where Natalia had a cousin. Not much family, but a cousin. So Maurice and Natalia moved to Atlanta, and what's true of Washington, D.C. is even more true of Atlanta in terms of its gentrification. When they got to Atlanta, they found a place, actually, a modest apartment, one-bedroom apartment on the edge of the city, not far from where Natalia and Maurice had both found jobs, short bus ride away. But then that landlady decided to sell her building. They moved again a little farther out of town to another place, as this often what happens with people who are unhoused, is they have to keep looking farther and farther away from the city center. They did find a place, but it was in really poor condition. And Natalia complained about the broken hot water heater once too many times, and that landlord evicted her. At this point, they'd had a child, a little boy who had autism, and they decided that they would keep looking, and they went farther and farther afield. But what they were now involved in was a skyrocketing real estate rental market. A rental market with far too many units for the people who were working, and of course, living close to the poverty line. There was very little they could afford. They did find a small place, a one-bedroom apartment for all three of them, and then Natalia's brother came down to Atlanta and said, "I don't have a place to stay," and so he slept on the couch. And then the landlady came to them and said, "I just found out that your brother's dealing drugs," and so they lost their lease. Maurice also lost his job, and so at this point, Maurice said, "I'm going to move down to Florida where I have a cousin, and I'll send money back." And Natalia was left trying to find another place. This began a vicious cycle, as so often happens with people who are poor, involving a co-signing service that they had to involve. You can get your loan co-signed for an extra fee. Roach-infested apartments. And then the latest thing to happen with apartments that are being bought up by private equity firms is they've automated the evictions. It's a logarithm. If you're 2 days late, you're evicted. She kept trying to find places and went from one place to another, staying in motels in between, never really finding that one place where she could land. Now she was an hour away from her job at a call center. And she had a panic attack at a call center. And so her supervisor said, "Don't worry, we have a psychiatrist you can go see." And so she sent her to the psychiatrist, and the psychiatrist did an intake and said, "Well, you just need to cut back your hours to half-time. Don't worry about it. It's going to be okay because your job will still be paid. It'll be paid leave for the other half-time." So that's what Natalia did. But that's not the truth of what happened. She was just half-time. And she couldn't get her full-time job back. And it wasn't long before she joined the working homeless, what we call the vehicular homeless. She lived in her car with her child, and she roamed from place to place, parking lot to parking lot, trying to find one more place to spend the night. She desperately wanted and applied for one of the Section 8 vouchers, which the federal government gives out to a very limited number of people, a very limited number of vouchers that you can apply to those landlords that will take the voucher and have rent at 30% of your income. The only problem in Atlanta at that time, and today is still the case, the waiting list is 8,000 names long. It's 78 years. If you're poor in America and you're trying to find housing, it's not just that you're trying to find housing, but the prevalence of what poverty means and how people look at you differently, particularly if they're landlords, is really quite pronounced. Francis and I brushed up against this some years ago. We had sold our house in Connecticut. We were planning a move someplace else. We still had a little place in Maine. And we were going to try to find an apartment for a few years as we finished the work that we had to do in Connecticut. And so we entered the real estate market for rentals. Wow. That was an eye-opener. We looked at hundreds of apartments, and they were in terrible condition. Or they wanted half my paycheck, which was saying a lot. And at the end of the day, we found this little cottage on Long Island Sound, a little summer beach cottage. Not much to speak about, but it was a great location and the rent was right. And as we were sitting there and talking to the landlady, she does the credit check right there. She has her laptop, she pulls it up, you have to come up with a paycheck stub, and she does the credit check, and she's doing the credit check. She looks up at us with wide eyes and she says, "Wow, I've never rented to people like you before. Why don't you own a house?" And that's when it struck me. This is the reality. The reality for most people is they're suspicious of you if you're poor, and they're not likely to rent to you. Landlords often don't even bother to return phone calls, much less show people anything. What I learned from this is that there's a misconception about poverty and homelessness in America. And the misconception is, and I think many of us, and I know myself, I would put myself in this category, many of us think of the homeless as lazy or on drugs or somehow mentally incapacitated. And that is sometimes true. But that's not the reason they're unhoused. Those are exasperating symptoms of poverty and homelessness in America. The reason they're being unhoused is really quite simple. There just isn't enough housing, enough affordable housing. And that is the reality in America today. What I realized also is that there are so many people who are in the real estate business who are trying to cannibalize on decaying cities in America. I've seen this in Philadelphia. I've met people who are trying to salvage homes, trying to turn them around so that they could house people who need them, but it's a drop in the bucket. And if you drive downtown Center City or into Fishtown or northern Philadelphia, you'll see these houses are being torn down and high-end apartments are going up. And the thing that is really disturbing is that a lot of these houses that maybe even go into foreclosure are being bought by private equity firms that are then doing one of two things. They either tear them down immediately or they cannibalize them until they are ready to be torn down. And then they tear them down and put up high-end apartments. We've taken the right of owning a home or being sheltered even in America, and we have done what we've done with healthcare, and we've commodified it. We've commodified it. And the subprime mess that we all went through in 2008, anybody remember that? Yeah. That was cannibalizing real estate. That was putting people in homes they could not afford because they had chopped up the mortgage debt in such a way that all it would take is somebody else to deal with the problem later down the road. And of course, the whole thing came crashing down, which made it only worse for poor people. Last Sunday, Lloyd Cole told you a little bit about what we're going to be doing over the next 3 months or 4 months here at MLUC, that we're going to deal with the issue of being unhoused and poverty and homeless in America. And we're going to do this because we've realized that the time has come for us to take a more proactive and systemic stand towards the problem of homelessness in America. Amen to that. That we realize that it's not enough just to deal with the symptoms of it, which are profound, but that we need to study, understand, and then put ourselves in positions where we're actually encountering poverty and homeless in America, not as some wanna situation, but as a way for us to understand how it is we're actually going to change what little part of the world we can. We can do this. I know we can do this. And I hope you'll join Lloyd and myself when Mark comes and speaks to us after the service, because I think we're going to talk about this in ways that you may not normally think about. Someone said last week to me, they said, well, what does this mean for Family Promise? Are we not going to do Family Promise anymore? Of course we're going to do Family Promise. That's vital. I mean, but it's a little bit like the founder of the Salvation Army said, you know, if you're picking the babies up out of the river, eventually you got to go up the river and see who's throwing the babies in, right? We're going to go up the river and see who's throwing the babies in. Our commitment to this issue is emblematic of any number of other issues that we could take on. And it's exhausting, right? Are we exhausted? Yeah, we're exhausted. I'm exhausted, and I'm on the second floor of the parsonage. Francis feeds me food. I lose 20 pounds. I'm great. I'm exhausted for a lot of reasons, but I think the thing that is really important for us to remember is that we're exhausted. Imagine how poor people are feeling in all of this mess. So friends, I hope you'll participate, because participation is part of the consciousness that we need to draw to be together. As I've been immobilized over the summer, I've realized a lot of things. One of them is you actually don't need that much. Your world doesn't need to be full of all the things we need to do all the time. And I say that from obviously a great place of privilege and comfort. But I also realize just how fragile we all are, right? We're all so fragile. This was a freak accident. I slipped on the floor. One leg was in another room. Didn't turn out so well for this leg. But I thought, wow, that could happen to any one of us, right? It happens all the time. Or there's a health crisis, or there's a financial problem. And you know, you'd be surprised how many houses out here are a couple of paychecks away from not having the house. People are working really hard. Yes, there's a lot of wealth, I understand that, but all across this country, there are people who are right on the edge. Right on the edge. And I realize that in this vulnerability also lies, perhaps, our salvation. Because if we're willing to recognize that all of us are vulnerable and all of us have some part of us that needs to be held up and loved, and we realize that for anybody else, not always the people that we know, we're that much closer to changing our small bit of the world. And then you multiply that by the millions of communities that make up this country, and if you make a movement out of that, it will change the way we look at the world. I realize that we're more resilient than we think we are. I realized that this community, this congregation, not only has incredible resources, but incredible love. And when we say that love is the center of our faith, I'm talking about you. I'm talking about you and how you reach out to those people who are in need, and you do all the time. And I hear these stories constantly. Constantly. And it gladdens my heart. because I realize this is the way we are going to move beyond our present darkness. Housing security as one issue among many, and there are many issues, is for me as good a place as any for us to do the good work. Because housing security, housing justice, is one of the ways in which we say we care about our neighbors. Can you hear me? And what we say about our neighbors says something to the larger worlds of which we're a part. Stable housing allows people to form relationships. It allows people to have a place they can call home, even a room that has a lock on the door. And we've created this crazy system of prove it until you're innocent, right? That keeps the unhoused unhoused. So how many times I've come across this in organizations that I've had the privilege to work with where they say, yeah, you can be in this shelter. Sometimes they even give you a room that has a lock. But as soon as we find out you're doing drugs, you're out. But that's the problem. Who can ever get clean enough to reach this so-called moral bar so that they can have a place to stay? Why don't we do it the other way around? Why don't we give them a place to stay and then deal with the drugs and the mental illness and all the other things, right? It's not complicated. The problem is that with a system built on capitalism as we have here now, and I won't get too Marxist on you, but on the system that we have right now, exclusion is the norm, inclusion is the privilege. And this harms the excluded and those who are excluding. You learn that belonging and having a way into the privileged society is competition, not restoration. It's a kind of restlessness that just makes all of the burning of our country all the worse. We expend ourselves competing with other people instead of working with other people. So I'd like to start with a quick question. You knew the questions were coming back, right? And the question is this. Turn to your neighbor. If you'd like to do this, just give it a go. Turn to your neighbor. And the question is, what does home mean to you? And let's take just a few minutes to ask that question and hear from one another. What does home mean to you? Thank you, everybody. Thank you, everybody. I appreciate that. Francis warned me You've been away for a while. Don't talk too much. So I want to hear from you all first. Let's hear from folks. We've got the ushers have got mics. Just raise your hand. What does home mean to you? Or share with somebody else what they said.
Home to me is family. I'm very fortunate to have a loving family. I know I can depend on them, but I realize there are so many people that don't have that.
Thank you.
We said the same thing. Two of us said the same thing, one word, family.
Good neighbors.
Good neighbors in the back, yes.
To me, home means a place that you can stay, be happy, eat, and a home can be ugly on the outside but be beautiful on the inside, and it can be ugly on the inside and be beautiful on the outside.
Wow, thank you. I'm impressed. That's a great Zen way of looking at things. Thank you. Molly?
Safety, comfort, and love.
Safety, comfort, and love.
If you think of home from a spiritual basis, you can never be outside of your divine home, no matter where you are.
Thank you. Maybe one more, yeah?
To me, home imbues one with self-worth. And that's something that unhoused folks are lacking, unfortunately.
Right. Thank you. All right, here's another question, just a raise of hands. Who grew up around here? Yeah, that's kind of what I thought. You know, I've served, this is my fourth congregation that Francis and I have had the honor of serving, and I've never met so many people that actually grew up here. Or if I'm in some other part of the country, I find out you grew up here. and I know earlier in June, I think it was, Ron D'Annunzio, our fabulous facilities manager, took me, Francis and I, on a tour. He grew up around here. And it was great. Ron took us to where he grew up as a kid, and he said, I'm 3 blocks from Eddie and Tommy, his co-workers, and this is the church I went to, and here's the school I went to, and he took us out to have pizza, what else? And then we went out to have Italian ices, and there were 2 Italian ices, and he said, you know, if this one's busy, you go down the street to the other one. He showed me all this, and I got to tell you, Francis and I were a little envious. I mean, we grew up in small towns, but we've moved our entire life. The longest place we stayed was when our kids were in elementary and high school. And I really think that that's a sense of home that touches on everything that we're saying here. That we understand it to not just be where we are in place, but how we relate to other people. And this brings me to what I think is going to be a critical piece of our work together in the 3 years I have left with you. And that is to shift from this understanding of ourselves as purely individuals, part of something, to being that something that is part of us. Moving from the individual to a communal consciousness. Moving away from just seeing ourselves as our own pilots alone and realizing that all of us depend on one another. The prevailing myth in housing insecurity, among many other ills, is that it's a problem of the individual, right? You need to pull yourselves up by your own bootstraps. Not only does that not work physically, it doesn't work even metaphorically. Who pulls themselves up by their own bootstraps? I can tell you I can't. Chances are you can't either. You need other people. We are, by our very nature, communal people. And when we're here together and we're being in fellowship together, we are actually part of, stay with me, a communal consciousness. Now, in case you think I went off the deep end on this, I didn't. I mean this sincerely. And when I hear it the most, especially from where I'm sitting, where I hear it the most is when you get up and sing. That is when you are truly a communal consciousness. You sing because you are doing it together. There's so much in our culture that keeps us apart. And Unitarian Universalism has had to make some steps in recent years that moves us away from this fierce love of the individual. I can believe in whatever I want. Nobody can tell me what to believe. And I'm like, oh, give me a break. One of our most beloved curriculum, adult curriculum for years and years, was building your own theology. Anybody take that? I imagine some of you probably did, yeah. And it was a great theology. I mean, it was, you come in there and you talk about what I believe and what I want to do and what I think happens after heaven or after I die and all these things that's me, 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 me. But friends, we got to move beyond that. We got to be part of a creating theology together. Can you hear me? We got to be part of something that's deeper and bigger than just ourselves. And we can do it. I know we can do it because I've seen you do it. I've seen you do it in relationships with other people. I've seen how you show up for people in need without saying anything else about it. Individualism, especially now in this maddening time, is part of what's creating this maddening time. Because we've got individuals, we got individual political leaders that think they're the only individual. And look where that's gotten us. The point is that individualism alone is not going to do it. And we need to stop teaching ourselves and our children that to be human is to be somehow radically alone. I mean, I remember, like many of you do, when I first came across Walden Pond from Henry David Thoreau, right? 10th grade English class. There he is, living out in Walden Pond, being his own individual, his own person in nature, finding out who he really is. Except that Thoreau actually didn't live all by himself out there. He'd go to Emerson's house for dinner every night, which was about a mile down the road in Concord. The responsibilities of self-belonging alone are crushing us. That's why we have to do something different. And that different is, how are we going to meld our consciousness together? I realize I'm on thin ice here. Meld our consciousness together in a way that will actually create a new kind of community. That people will walk in here and they'll go, as they are doing now, there's something happening here. What is happening here? I think what we're going to end up doing is moving beyond this enlightenment mentality that each individual is all that you need in the world to understanding that we're actually having to be part of one another's lives in ways that we don't normally think about doing. We think about, what happens in your house happens in your house. When I was younger, I used to call this be Italian, right? Yeah, get in your business. Because that's how we connect with one another. We understand that we're vulnerable and we try to do something different. There's a persuasive and pervasive interconnectedness that makes us part of a community like this one. Can you hear me on this? Yeah. This is very important. We're going to need to move beyond individual beliefs. They're fine, but we need to find out what it is we believe together. They say in Africa, South Africa, and Central Africa, they have this Swahili term, Ubuntu. Ubuntu. Ubuntu is sometimes translated as I am because you are, and you are because I am. That's what I'm talking about. To look for the meaningful connections that to move us into a rhythm of the collective that we didn't have individually before. That's the solution, friends, to the insanity we're living through right now. That's the solution. And I know that not everybody will agree with me on this, but I think if we try to practice this understanding of a communal consciousness, we will actually change the world, however small, but we won't be doing it alone. It'll be a movement. Because you yourself are not going to stop the tanks from rolling down the streets. Maybe you will for a while. What will happen is when we start thinking as a people on the ideals that made America great, that we still believe that they're there, that are beyond any one individual, right? It's not about discovering yourself anymore. I hope you've gotten that. No. if you have a problem discovering yourself, come see me, we'll talk. But really what I want you to do is discover who we are. That's the point. It takes courage to be together. This is a sacred act. Here and online, it's a sacred act. It's late, and I'll close with a story. A true story. I met Charlie serving a church, won't say where. He was an African American. He was quite overweight. He came to us originally from an outplacement firm, a temporary firm. We needed a custodian, and he was the custodian. And he did a good job. Well, he did a good enough job. It was fine. I didn't really care. He was friendly. He was outgoing. He was really a sweet guy. And I realized that there was something that was missing in his life. And I would talk to him about it. He said, well, I've separated from my wife, and we just had a little baby girl, and she was born prematurely, and my wife and my baby girl are living with her mother. And I said, well, where are you living? Oh, here and there. And then I realized that Charlie was living in his car, because I would show up sometimes in the morning and the car was parked there. And I thought, hey, Charlie's here early. See? Charlie wasn't there early. He spent the night there until he was getting chased off the parking lot by the police. Charlie, it turns out, was a part of the vehicular unhoused. He was living in his car. He was doing a great job. Until someone, and again, I won't say where this was, on the board of that congregation, discovered that Charlie had been formerly incarcerated. And he hadn't put that down on his employment application. He hadn't checked the box, as we say. The board met and they said, well, if he's in a trusted position, I don't know how we can do this. And, I argued vehemently, it's just the reality. Let's not push on this. It's okay. But they decided, no, we had to terminate him. And my heart was broken. And Francis and I got together, along with some other people, as big a cash gift as we could get, and tried to find him a placement someplace else. That's another one of these spirals of poverty that incarceration brings to people. And as we sent him off, we were all crying. And I want to believe, because I never saw Charlie again, I want to believe that he was able to find a place. He was able to find another job and find a place and bring his wife and his baby girl back together. But I don't know that, because I lost touch with him, as one does lose touch with people in the real world in which we live, right? This point we're at right now, this nexus, this crossroads between all the things that are wrong in our country, can begin at a very personal and yet communal place. We can make the difference in people's lives. Really make a difference in people's lives. And that is why we have chosen this topic to focus in on. I see this as a flagship for what we are becoming as a congregation, as a community, as a consciousness joined together. My friends, we are at a critical hinge right now in my time with you in this 5-year ministry. This is the time we swing that hinge to yet another direction that is more outward facing, more inclusive, especially of people who are not like us, in ways that we may not even realize they're not like us, and find in that a strength and fortitude that we didn't know we even had. Who's with me?